So welcome to first TheiaDevCon. I have the pleasure to do the opening session today, and I want to talk about Theia in general, how we came here, where we are now, and where we could go. Hopefully we can discuss these things in the coming 2 days. So before that, I want to introduce myself. I'm Sven Efftinge, co-founder of TypeFox.io. We also do Gitpod. And so we founded TypeFox in January 2016. And the company is mainly based in Germany. We are remote, so we have people working from Paris and Berlin and Lippstadt. And we are focused on developer tools and language engineering. So the idea is, like, large corporations usually have their developer tools departments, and we are basically the external department for larger corporations. So we work really with lots of bigger companies around the globe and build engineering tools for them, for all kinds of vertical domains, aerospace or hardware design, such things. And also this comes a bit from our background. So we have been working together for more than 10 years. Before we founded TypeFox, I was branch leader of a consulting company in Germany, where that particular branch was dedicated totally to developing Xtext, which is a language development framework, and Xtend, which is a programming language that we developed there that is pretty good at doing code generation and so on. And in that time, we've already built Eclipse RCP-based products for clients, and also IntelliJ-based products and so on. So got a lot of experience, but then over time, we got also this feedback that people asked, well, should we base this new product on Eclipse RCP, Eclipse SWT is more or less dead. I mean, there was no Linux update for some years and so on. And so we noticed that, and we wanted to put the Xtext language framework into something that, survives the life cycle of Eclipse. So what we started there was developing also IntelliJ tooling. Like, the idea of Xtext is you have a grammar, and usually with parser generators, you get a parser from that, right? With Xtext, you get a full Eclipse plugin. So including content assist and all the things, and then you can customize it. So that's the main idea. And then we wanted to also support other IDEs. So we developed support for IntelliJ, and we developed support for web IDEs. At that time, it was Ace and Orion. And then soon we had a lot of small satellite projects and platforms we had to support, and it was a mess, and we understood, oh, we can't do that. So that's why, and that's how I want to start the timeline to Theia from our perspective. We started investing, looking into the language server protocol. At that point in time, it was not a thing that people were talking about outside the VS Code community. So VS Code did the LSP just to, not force everyone to build language support in JavaScript, basically. That was the main idea. And we looked at the protocol and thought, well, it's very VS Code-ish, but we could probably use this and connect it to other IDEs as well. So we implemented that for Xtext, so we could get rid of our IntelliJ support, even long-term, maybe the Eclipse thing, we are not there, and the web support as well. And then next up, we did a spike adding LSP support to J. So that is the pull request. It was really just a kind of a small cut through, adding content assist and so on. That got picked up by at that time, Code NV team around Florent and so on, and they built a full-fledged language server support into the J before 7 IDE, the GWT-based one. Around that time, we started a new project for a client from San Francisco. They wanted us to build a cloud IDE for data science and machine learning. And we based that on J and Xtext. And I presented that at Eclipse conference and also got in touch with a lot of Eclipse people talking and pitching them about the language server protocol. A month later, the IPython UPyter community announced UPyter Lab, which was a much better fit for what we needed to build there because it already targets the data science community and so pretty well. So we switched over from J to UPyter Lab. And so this is UPyter Lab, and if like people who know Theia for some time might see some things in there that are familiar somewhat. So we used this platform, was also very early, and they were breaking us every other day. And so it was pretty hard to keep up there. The idea with UPyter Lab is it's IPython notebooks with additional IDE support. So traditionally, IPython notebooks are just this document where you have content, and then you can have diagrams. And so it's this literate programming where you have code and documentation mixed. And they figured, we also want to call some real Python code that lives in Python files, so we need to have some sort of file editing support. And so that's why they developed UPyter Lab. It's focusing on data science and machine learning, and you can tell if you look at the code also, there is the idea of kernels, that is the execution, the program. You throw your data at and you execute your machine learning models on, which is more or less everywhere. So if you want to do this thing, then UPyter Lab is a good platform, but if you want to do something else, then probably not so much. It is implemented in TypeScript, which was super nice for us. So we really like the TypeScript programming language. And actually, we started with that project learning TypeScript also and learning VS Code, how that feels. And we built on top there, we integrated the language server protocol, the debug adapter protocol. We implemented an R language server. R is another, like the alternative to Python in data science. We implemented that using Xtext. And then we did some other things like the data grid viewer that lazily loads and stuff like that. Unfortunately, the IDE, which was quite nice, never got really marketed well by our clients. And it's also not open source. They have now started an effort to put some of the bits in open source back to UPyter Lab. But we learned a lot of stuff in that time, right? And then so until now, what we did is we worked with Eclipse and JetBrains, IntelliJ stuff, and we had a look into Eclipse J, worked on that, and UPyter Lab. And still our clients were asking, what platform should we use, right? Some were asking for web stuff, some were asking for desktop stuff, and in many cases you could even tell now do something and wait 3 years, and then you come back and you want to do this thing also on desktop or also on web. So that was more or less our view at that point. And then in October 2016 at EclipseCon Europe, I met with Dominique Toupin, former Ericsson manager, with whom we kicked off the Theia project at that time. So our scope there was primarily have an answer to all these people asking, in Eclipse, a lot of people think that that's the Java IDE, which is old and maybe a bit bloated and so on. Actually, it's also quite good in many senses, but what's more important is in Eclipse community, there are super many products, engineering products, that you don't see in the wild, but they are in the companies that are built based on the Eclipse IDE. And they all, at some point, need to have a new platform. So it's really important for this thing, for us, that it is extensible so that you can build these products, like white label extensible, so to say. And the other thing is we looked at, okay, what could be, if we don't do anything, what possibly would be the next Eclipse, right? And at that time already, it looked pretty much like VS Code would be an answer. And then what we did around those times are we were getting in touch with all the people involved, more or less, or what we thought were interested. So we talked with the Atom developers from GitHub, we talked with GitLab, and with the Microsoft VS Code people, and obviously also with Red Hat and SAP and IBM and so on. What are their ideas towards, this future of IDE? And specifically, Microsoft had no interest in joining some effort. I mean, yeah, so it's easier if you just build it your way, so to say, I guess. But that's a real problem for many others. And I will later talk a bit more about that. I guess I talk a bit, in a few slides. So then in May 2017, I found that yesterday so that is the first version of Theia that we released in May 2017. So it's not really a release, just a build, so to say. And now, look, what we all did together until today, right? It looks much nicer. So we've come a long way, I would say. But I want to talk a bit more about Microsoft. Last year they acquired GitHub. So now they own basically every open source community out there. I think there are a few that are not on GitHub, but it's really, there is a lot of data and network going on, and it will be pretty hard to disrupt that. So GitLab is trying hard, but they will have a hard time with the SaaS thing that is going on there with all the network effect around that. And then they've built TypeScript, which is an awesome language, and therefore it more or less starts to replace JS entirely. So if you look at also at analyst results and so on, what they measure is like TypeScript is going like this. So in a couple of years, TypeScript will be kind of the more or less standard, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and then they also own VS Code, which is now the most popular IDE and editor, right? And it all looks pretty nice, and they are open. They do a lot of things in open source. They're I think, the biggest contributor to open source at GitHub, or at least among the top 3. I'm not sure about that. So that's all cool. But if you look closer, this stuff is not really so open. It's more or less kind of open for end users, but not open for competition. You can put it like that. So the VS Code you see on GitHub, we don't use that, right? If you download it, you download Visual Studio Code, which is a Microsoft product with a different license, with doing telemetry data to Microsoft, allowing you to access the marketplace. If you do a build of VS Code from GitHub, no marketplace. You cannot install any extensions there. And there's actually a fine line in the license that disallow anyone to access a marketplace. And so then they build up new tools. There are all kind of service tools, like LiveShare is one example, not open source, of course. The remote container stuff they have just announced at Build is also not open source. What they do is they inject, like when you start a container, they inject a small server executable into that container, connect to that through an extended protocol. That is open source, but the server bit is not open source. And even there is a license that says you cannot use it in any other service other than what we want, more or less. So looks like only Azure and local Docker. Yeah, and I think I mentioned that already. The marketplace is not open source, means we cannot access a marketplace, but also means no company can install an on-premise extension registry where they keep their kind of proprietary extensions that they don't want to leave into the internet. That's just not supported. And I think there's a big opportunity here. And I hope we can discuss that also later through the 2 days. And yeah, and then I also announced Visual Studio Online with more or less the same pitch that we have for Gitpod.io. That is likely not going to be open source at all, of course, right? So it looks like, you know, the end user stuff, like they make everything free and open source-ish, so the developers like them and it's cool, but they lock out all competition. And I think that's a problem. And we can do something about that because we have started the Theia project, which is exactly the thing that can, to some extent, disrupt this part, right? We allow people to build their products and services based on a really vendor-neutral open source thing. And we actually managed to grow a community that is quite diverse. We have many different contributors from different companies, individuals, and so on. We get new pull requests every other day of high quality, actually. And it's really, really going well, I would say. And also, functionality-wise, we are catching up with VS Code, especially the support for VS Code extension that Florent will talk about that a bit more, is helping us so much because now we can use the 10,000 extensions that the community did outside of VS Code or Theia, and we can just use that. And all we need to do is support this protocol and catch up with what's in the VS Code core. And one thing I also wanted to say is like the scope of saying, well, let's just do it like VS Code has helped us so much to simplify contribution. I mean, this diversity usually comes at a price where you have to discuss everything, align goals, and so on. But with this sort of blueprint, it was super easy for us. You know, I mean, what we do is, the baseline is, if you want to do it differently, then you have to explain why. If you want to do it just the same as VS Code, go ahead. That's usually fine, right? If you don't agree, of course, you can always speak up. But that's kind of the baseline, which makes it super easy and simplifies the process a lot. And I think there are 3 good reasons to do it like VS Code. One is VS Code is very popular because of its UX. They have put a lot of effort into UX design and so on. So why do it differently? Well, we need to have good reasons. There might be some reasons, but usually, I mean, that's just good. Then a lot of people know the UX of VS Code already. So if they switch to a Theia-based Cloud IDE, editor, whatever, or a desktop IDE, then they feel more at home, right? They don't have to relearn all the things. And the third thing is we are supporting the VS Code extension protocol. So the extension developers implement extensions with some assumptions of how these things behave in VS Code. If we would do these things or interpret these things totally different, then these assumptions would break. So these are the things we should keep in mind. But I would say also, we are now at a place or in a state where we could also in some scenarios go ahead and do stuff that VS Code doesn't do and do it better because we have already caught up so much and so well already. So what next? I think important is still kind of making this path, like supporting VS Code extension and also adding or completing things that are better in VS Code is still something we should keep doing for the next month. But then we also should look at having a big release where we are doing some bigger marketing things, but also improve the onboarding process. I mean, it's really interesting how many pull requests and so on we get given the documentation we have, right? I mean, it's basically non-existing. I mean, there are some parts, but I think most people would just look at the code. So improve the onboarding by providing docs, how to extend Theia and so on, but also simplifying the consumption. So currently, like you can run Docker, or you can start a Git pod workspace or something like that, but you don't have a download where you have an Electron build, or what's also would be cool would be a self-contained binary that you can throw at a server or at a Docker container, and it would just launch a Theia backend there, which would be a bit similar to the server binary with VS Code, although it includes everything. And then I think we could really think about building and open sourcing an extension registry for VS Code extensions. Just, nothing else. We just do it. We can build in open source, so everyone can install it in their scenarios if they want. It can have some sort of proxy mechanism, as is typical in registry. So you have one local, it would look there. If it's not there, then it goes out to some central registry. We would put, ideally under Eclipse org, we put one hosted VS Code extension service there, so people can publish to that and look at that. And then we make it super easy to publish to that. What VS Code have is a command line where you can just publish, right? We can do exactly the same, and maybe we just name the command line, I don't know, the better version of it or so, and it published to both. So people can just use that. They will still have their stuff in the Microsoft registry, but also in ours. And then from there, we can grow, and the more Theia adopters there are, the more this extension registry is also interesting for the extension developers. And the less Microsoft is going to make a big deal out of their registry, maybe. Maybe we can do something about that, or at least weaken their lever there a bit. All right, that's it from me. Today we have 2 Fishbowl sessions, and I wanted to tell you a bit about Fishbowl because this format, I brought that up. So a Fishbowl is basically an open panel discussion. That means we put some chairs somewhere center, like 5 or so, and there's one chair is always empty. And so the other 4 can discuss a topic. And whenever someone from the audience picks the 5th chair, someone from the other 4 have to leave. So there always needs to be one chair free. That's the old format. And the audience has, if you want to say something, you just have to go and take the empty chair, right? So that's what the format works like. And for the second Fishbowl, we have the topic Theia 1.0, what we need, like, do we want to do that? When? Why? And what is the requirement? What is the expectation to that, and stuff like that. So I think that's good, because then everyone can, come and tell what's important for them. For the first one, we asked you in a mail, and there was one request regarding, let's discuss the competition with Microsoft, and that was not from me. And I think that's nice. I mean, I would really love to hear what your take is on that. Also, maybe we can talk a bit about this registry idea that I just brought up. Yeah, I think if you have questions for my session, I have 5 minutes left.
VS Code extensions are quite limited. in terms of the user interface. You can add the tooltips, you can add to the left tree and so on, but if you want to do a simple visualization, for example, then you have to do a web view. And web views are warned about, they use power and they are limited and so on. Will you have the same limitations in Theia?
No. In Theia, we have two extension models that might be confusing, but makes a lot of sense when you say that. Because the VS Code extensions are limited and they are living in a sandbox, so there is not even a hacky way to solve these problems. So you have to put everything into web views, which is like very hacky actually. We also have, in Theia, that's called the plugin mechanism, which is a bit confusing. We also have Theia extensions, which is more like Eclipse plugins. It's kind of first-class components that can access every API, and they are even more flexible than Eclipse because we have a dependency injection framework on the basis, so you can override fine-grained parts and really adjust everything, which makes the surface of API super big. So we have to discuss also regarding the Theia 1.0 release how we deal with API stability on that level, right? Because I personally prefer the freedom to hook in everywhere. I think that's quite nice, and I accept that the project says, well, we might break you because I can freeze versions and so on, but then I have really the flexibility to build the product as I want to have it. And yeah, actually that's a key feature of Theia that VS Code doesn't have. So you can really build everything based on Theia.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks.
Thomas?
About the competition aspect. I mean, aren't you guys doing kind of the same thing with Gitpod.io, or is that different from what Microsoft does? Because it is something on the side. It's not completely open source, right?
Yeah, no, I'm not saying not doing it open source is a bad thing. I'm saying that Microsoft, I think open source needs a business model for sure. I think that's fine, right? You have to be clear about that, what is open source and what's not, and so on. I think that is something that Microsoft kind of tricks a bit. But no, what's more important is they are very close to being a monopolist in the developer tools space. And I think that's not healthy for the software developer world. And, well, Gitpod is not a monopolist.
Not yet.
No, but seriously, I think it's important if you do open source that you have a business model behind that. There's also open source that you do just out of, fun. I like that, and that's fine. But that's not the kind of open source that we are doing here, I think. Yeah.
If I may, as an answer for the question, there's also, Theia, the extension mechanism is actually extensible, so you can add your own plugin APIs. So that would be another way to do it, but you wouldn't be compatible with VS Code anymore. So you'd have to structure that in a way that it kind of degrades gracefully when you run on VS Code or when you can use your own plugin API.
Yeah, but regarding DOM, it's not possible. So
yes, you'd have to write your UI on the other side that talks to that particular plugin API.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then there are also limitations that are important to understand. So in the beginning, we thought we could use these Theia extensions and allow users to install them at runtime. And then reality showed us that that's really hard to get right because you run into all these version constraint conflicts and so on. So we went for the plugin mechanism and then aligned with VS Code extension. I think that's a very interesting part of that. And those extensions, or like those VS Code extensions, you can install at runtime by users. The Theia extensions you would do at build time.
Another player in the field is Cloud9, and it was acquired by Amazon some time ago. What's your relation to Cloud9?
I think Cloud9 is was, I don't know, was or is a very good Cloud IDE, one of the first one. Now we are looking at a new generation which VS Code made possible with their protocols allowing Monaco, which is a high quality editor, to be reused and so on. So I think they'll have a hard time long term to stay compatible, I would say.